My eyes snapped open, searing against the intrusion of bright, clean morning light. I wasn't under tons of obsolete farming equipment. I was in my bed. The old farmhouse bed with the wrought iron frame that squeaked whenever I shifted weight. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, still racing from the terror of dying. I sat up, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I clutched the quilt. The fabric was rough cotton, worn thin from countless washes, smelling faintly of lavender detergent and dust. It was real. I looked at my hands. No grease under the fingernails. No bruises, no blood. My gaze darted to the bedside table. The digital clock glowed red. 7:30 a.m. Next to it, my phone. I grabbed it. The cool glass alien against my sweaty palm. The date stared back at me. June 14th. 3 months. I was back 3 months before the accident. 3 months before Bethany decided she couldn't wait for nature to take its course with our ailing grandfather and needed me out of the way first. The panic began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity that settled deep in my gut like a swallowed stone. The terror of death faded, leaving behind a profound, icy stillness. I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what this was. A second chance. But not a chance to fix things. Not a chance to save the farm or redeem my family. It was a chance to let them rot. I swung my legs out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cool hardwood floor. The floorboards groaned under me, a familiar sound that used to feel like home, but now just sounded like decay. I walked to the mirror on the wardrobe door. The face staring back was younger, less tired around the eyes, but the expression was unfamiliar. It was empty. The warmth, the earnest desire to please, the desperate need to keep grandfather's legacy alive. It was gone. Died in the north pasture. I went downstairs. The house was silent. Grandfather was already in the hospital in the city. This was the week they moved him to hospice care. The week the sharks started circling. The kitchen smelled of old coffee grounds and lemon pledge. I didn't bother making a fresh pot. I just stood at the window, looking out over the acres of corn, green and thigh-high, swaying in the morning breeze. It looked beautiful. It looked prosperous. It was a lie. That was the secret I had died protecting. The secret that was slowly killing the farm anyway. The north pasture where the tractor rolled wasn't just bad soil. It was a graveyard of industrial runoff grandfather had allowed companies to dump back in the 70s for quick cash. The debt on the farm wasn't just bad bank loans. It was tied to people who didn't use collection agencies but tire irons. I had been breaking my back trying to clean it up, to pay them off quietly. Bethany didn't know that. Bethany saw 500 acres of prime real estate ripe for a housing development that would make her rich and get her out of this dusty zip code forever. The sound of a car engine broke the silence. Not a farm truck. A smooth, purring engine. A silver BMW crunched up the gravel driveway. Bethany. Right on schedule. She stepped out of the car, sunglasses covering half her face, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed despite the humidity. Even from the kitchen window, I could almost smell that cloying vanilla perfume rising off her skin in the heat. She was here to feign concern for grandfather, to help me manage things, which meant undermining me at every turn until she could snatch the deed. In my last life, I met her at the door with a forced smile and a pot of coffee. I tried to reason with her. I tried to show her the spreadsheets that proved we were barely hanging on. This time, I watched her approach the door like a predator sizing up wounded prey. I didn't move to open it. I let her knock. The sharp rap, rap, rap of her manicured knuckles on the wood echoed in the empty kitchen. I waited 5 full seconds before walking slowly to the door. I opened it. "Clara, darling." She breezed past me before I could speak, bringing the suffocating cloud of artificial vanilla and peach with her. It hit the back of my throat, triggering a phantom sensation of crushing weight on my chest. I suppressed a gag, turning it into a cough. God, it is stifling in here. Don't you ever run the AC? She tossed her designer handbag onto the kitchen table, the heavy metal buckles clattering against the wood. I just came from the hospital. Grandpa looks. Oh, Clara, it's just awful. There were no tears in her voice, only a practiced tremor. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. The formica was cool against my back. He's dying, Bethany. That's usually awful. She paused, taking off her sunglasses to reveal perfectly applied eye makeup. My flat tone seemed to throw her off her script. Well, yes, of course. But we have to be practical, don't we? Someone has to think about the future. The farm, I said. The legacy, she corrected, her eyes glittering greedily. We can't just let it fall to ruin, Clara. I know you love playing farmer, but let's be honest. You're drowning out here. Look at this place. She waved a hand dismissively around the kitchen, her diamond bracelet catching the light. It's depressing. In the past, I would have argued. I would have defended the history, the hard work. Now I just watched her. She was a caricature of avarice. You're right, I said quietly. Bethany froze. What? You're right, I repeated, pushing off the counter and walking toward the window, turning my back to her. I am drowning. The debts, the maintenance, grandfather's medical bills. It's too much. I can't do it anymore. I heard the sharp intake of breath behind me. She hadn't expected a surrender. She had expected a fight she intended to win by any means necessary. Clara, are you serious? Her voice had lost its faux sympathy. Now it was sharp, with calculated interest. Because if you're saying you want out, I turned around. I made sure my shoulders were slumped, my eyes cast down, a performance of defeat. I do. I just want it over with. The lawyers are reading the preliminary will on Friday, aren't they? Yes, she breathed. Grandfather left it to me. We both know that. I looked up, meeting her eyes. But if I decline the inheritance, it goes to the next of kin. You. Silence stretched in the kitchen. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant buzzing of a fly against the screen door. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, calculating the square footage, the zoning prospects. You would just give it to me? She asked, skepticism warring with intense desire in her tone. I don't want the burden, Beth. You've always had a head for business. You always said this place was a goldmine waiting to happen. I forced a weak, bitter smile. Maybe you're the one who's supposed to save it. Or sell it. I don't care anymore. I just want out. She stared at me for a long moment, trying to find the trap. But she was too blinded by the prize. She saw a beaten dog giving up its bone. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Well, Clara, if that's how you really feel, I suppose it's my duty to step up. For family. The word family coming from her mouth tasted like ash. Good, I said, my voice hollow. Then it's yours. All of it. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer comfort. She grabbed her handbag, the leather creaking in her tight grip. We should call lawyer Henderson. Let him know we have an understanding before Friday. No need for drama at the reading. No drama, I agreed. Just paperwork. She was practically vibrating with excitement as she headed for the door. This is for the best, Clara. You'll see. You can move to the city, get a little apartment, maybe find a husband. Leave the heavy lifting to me. I intend to, I murmured. She paused at the doorway, looking back at me one last time. For a second, she looked almost disappointed that I hadn't put up a fight. It robbed her of the satisfaction of crushing me. But the greed won out. Bye, darling. Take a shower. You look sickly. The door shut behind her. I listened to the BMW start up and speed away, gravel spraying. I walked to the sink and turned on the tap, splashing cold water on my face, scrubbing away the phantom scent of her perfume. I dried my face with a rough dish towel. The mirror over the sink showed a faint smile playing on my lips. It was colder than the ice in my veins. She wanted the legacy. She wanted the Beaumont farm. She was going to get the toxic soil that defied remediation. She was going to get the $3 million in high-interest loans owed to a syndicate operating out of a Chicago basement. She was going to get the rusted machinery that was one startup away from exploding. I hadn't surrendered. I had just baited the hook. The funeral was a grotesque affair, a performance of grief staged for the benefit of the town's gossips. Bethany, of course, was the star. She wore a black designer dress that cost more than a month's feed for the cattle. Her face a practiced mask of sorrow beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She cried on cue at the graveside, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. I stood 10 feet away, the humid air thick with the scent of lilies and damp earth, watching the mahogany coffin being lowered into the ground. I felt nothing. No sorrow for the grandfather who had burdened me with his sins, no anger at the cousin pretending to care. Just a cold, clinical observation. The real show began after the sandwiches were eaten, and the last condolences muttered. We gathered in Lawyer Henderson's oak-paneled office in town. The air conditioner rattled softly, fighting the July heat. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Henderson, a portly man with a sheen of sweat permanently on his brow, adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable. He liked me. He knew I worked the land. He didn't like Bethany. As you know, Henderson began, his voice gravelly. Josiah Beaumont's will leaves the entirety of the Beaumont estate, including the farmhouse, all outbuildings, livestock, and the 500 acres of land, to his granddaughter, Clara Beaumont. Bethany sat stiffly beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The large diamond on her finger cut into her skin. Henderson looked at me over his glasses. Clara, if you are willing to accept. I decline, I said. My voice was quiet, steady. Henderson blinked. I beg your pardon? I decline the inheritance, Mr. Henderson. I do not wish to take ownership of the Beaumont farm. He stared at me, flabbergasted. The leather chair groaned as he leaned forward. Clara, do you understand what you're saying? This is your home, your birthright. It's too much for me, I said, reciting the script I had prepared. The debt, the work. I can't handle it alone. I want a different life. I could feel Bethany vibrating beside me, the tension radiating off her like heat waves. Very well, Henderson said slowly, clearly disapproving. If the primary beneficiary declines, the estate passes to the secondary beneficiary named in the will. That would be. He turned his gaze to Bethany. Bethany Vance, niece of the deceased. Bethany didn't even try to hide the triumphant smile that broke across her face. It was predatory, ugly. I accept, she said quickly, her voice sharp with greed. I will take full responsibility for the estate. Henderson sighed, a long, weary sound. He shuffled papers on his desk. Very well. There are, of course, formalities. Transfer taxes, outstanding liens to be addressed. I'll handle it all, Bethany interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. Just draw up the paperwork. I want the deed transferred as soon as possible. And the liabilities? Henderson warned, looking pointedly at her. You understand you are inheriting the debts as well as the assets? I'm aware of the mortgage, Mr. Henderson. It's manageable. The mortgage, the quaint little bank loan that was the tip of the iceberg. She had no idea about the second set of books hidden under the floorboards in the tack room, the ones I had burned yesterday morning. As you wish, Henderson said dejectedly. An hour later, it was done. Bethany signed the papers with a flourish of a gold pen. The moment the ink dried, the atmosphere in the room shifted. She sat up straighter, her shoulders squaring. The act of mourning was over. The reign of Queen Bethany had begun. Well, she said, standing up and smoothing her skirt, that's settled. Clara, you'll need to move your things out of the main bedroom. I'll be taking it. I'll be gone by the weekend, I said, standing up as well. She looked surprised. Gone? Where are you going? I rented a small apartment in town, over the bakery. Her eyebrows shot up. That tiny place? Clara, really. You don't have to rush off. There's plenty of room at the farm. You could stay in the guest room, help me manage things, until I get settled. Help her manage things. Translation. Be her unpaid farmhand while she courted developers. No thank you, I said. I'm done with farming. She shrugged, already losing interest. Suit yourself, but don't expect any handouts from the sale when I flip the place. You walked away. I know. I walked out of the office into the blinding afternoon sun. The heat hit me like a physical blow. I didn't look back. I walked to my old pickup truck, the metal door handle burning my palm. I drove straight to the apartment I had secured 2 days ago. It was small, a studio really, above a bakery on Main Street. It smelled perpetually of yeast and caramelized sugar. The walls were thin, and the linoleum floor was peeling in the corner. But it was clean, and it was mine. I spent the next 3 days moving. I took only my clothes, a few books, and the small amount of cash I had squirreled away. I left everything else. The antique furniture, the family photos, the heirlooms. They were part of the rot now. My last night at the farm, I stood on the porch one final time. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the fields. The crickets were just starting their nightly chorus. It was a scene that used to fill me with a deep sense of belonging. Now, it just felt like looking at a beautiful painting hiding a patch of black mold. I saw Bethany's BMW pulling up the drive. She was moving in tonight. I didn't wait to greet her. I got in my truck and drove away, the tires crunching on the gravel one last time. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. My new life was quiet and simple. I got a job stocking shelves at the local grocery store. The work was mindless, physical, and paid minimum wage. I loved it. There were no life or death decisions, no looming debts, no toxic soil to worry about. Just boxes of cereal to align and cans of soup to stack. My apartment was sparse. A mattress on the floor, a secondhand card table and chair I found at a garage sale, a single hot plate. But the morning sun that came through the east-facing window was warm and honest, not filtered through layers of family deception. I woke up early, not because I had to feed livestock, but because I wanted to watch the town wake up. I drank cheap coffee from a chipped mug and listened to the sounds of the street below, the bakery delivery truck, the hiss of the street sweeper, the early morning joggers. I made a friend, Sarah, who worked the register at the grocery store. She was loud, opinionated, and had a laugh that could shatter glass. She knew nothing about farming or inheritances or toxic waste. She cared about reality TV and her latest disastrous date. "You're too quiet, Clara," she said one day on our lunch break, tearing into a bag of chips. The break room smelled of microwaved leftovers and stale coffee. "You got secrets." I smiled, taking a bite of my apple. The crunch was loud in the small room. "No secrets, just enjoying the peace." "Peace is boring," she retorted. "You need some drama." "I've had enough drama for a lifetime," I said. And I had. But I was still watching the drama unfold from a distance. News in a small town travels faster than a brush fire. I heard about Bethany's grand entrance before the end of her first week. She had hired a landscaping crew to manicure the lawn around the house, fired the 2 old ranch hands who had worked for grandfather for 20 years, and was already hosting dinner parties for the town council members. She was playing the part of the wealthy landowner perfectly. She drove into town in her shiny BMW, wearing impeccable white linen outfits that would be ruined by 5 minutes of actual farm work. She breezed through the grocery store, buying imported cheeses and expensive wine, barely acknowledging me as I stocked the shelves in my uniform. "Clara, darling!" she exclaimed one afternoon, nearly running me over with her cart in the produce aisle. The scent of vanilla and peach hit me, instantly transporting me back to the day she let me die. My stomach clenched. "Bethany," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I continued stacking avocados. The rough skin of the fruit was cool against my fingers. "Look at you," she said, her eyes scanning my uniform with thinly veiled disgust. "Stalking vegetables. Are you happy living like this?" "Very." She laughed, a tinkling, brittle sound that turned heads in the aisle. "Oh, please, you're just being stubborn. Admit you made a mistake." "How is the farm?" I asked, changing the subject. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just a flicker in her eyes. "Oh, wonderful. Marvelous. I'm in talks with a developer from the city. They're very interested in the South Acreage for a luxury condo complex." The South Acreage. The good land. The only land that was actually worth anything. "That sounds lucrative," I said. "It will be," she said, regaining her composure. "Millions, Clara. You could have had a slice of that pie if you weren't so." She waved a hand vaguely. "Simple. I'm happy for you, Bethany." She eyed me suspiciously. My lack of envy always confused her. "Well, I have to run. Dinner party tonight. The mayor is coming." She strutted away, the click-clack of her heels on the tile floor echoing long after she was gone. I finished stacking the avocados. The first crack had appeared. That flicker in her eyes. She was lying. It started small. A month into her reign, Sarah told me that Bethany's check at the grocery store had bounced. Embarrassing. Sarah chewed her gum loudly. She made a huge scene, blamed the bank, said it was a transfer error from her investment account, had to put all that fancy cheese back. A week later, I saw her car parked outside the seed and feed store. Not the BMW. Grandfather's old rusted Ford pickup. She was arguing with Old Man Miller, the owner. I couldn't hear the words, but her gestures were sharp and angry. Miller was shaking his head, pointing at a ledger on the counter. She left empty-handed, slamming the truck door so hard, rust flaked off onto the pavement. The bills were coming due. The legitimate ones first. The feed bills, the vet bills, the equipment repair bills that Grandfather had let slide. Then came the water. I was walking home from work one evening, enjoying the cool air, when I saw the county water truck rumbling out of town toward the farm. A bright yellow notice was taped to the window of the bakery when I got upstairs. A boil water advisory for the western part of the county, the part where the farm was. The next day, the headline in the local paper read, "County investigates water contamination near Beaumont Farm." I sat in my small apartment, drinking black coffee, and read the article. A routine test had found elevated levels of heavy metals in the groundwater, specifically arsenic and lead. The chemicals dumped in the north pasture. They were migrating. I folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside. The sunlight streaming through the window felt a little colder. Bethany showed up at my door that night. It was late, past 10. She didn't knock, she pounded. When I opened the door, the change in her appearance was shocking. The perfect hair was pulled back in a messy knot. Her designer clothes were rumpled, but it was her eyes, they were wide, underlined by dark circles and filled with a frantic energy. "You knew," she hissed, pushing past me into the small apartment. The smell of vanilla perfume was soured by the metallic scent of fierce sweat. "Knew what?" I asked calmly, closing the door. She spun around, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. It was an EPA notice of violation. "The land. The water. It's poisoned, Clara. They're saying it's industrial waste. From years ago." Her voice rose to a screech. "Did you know about this?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Grandfather never talked about it. "Don't lie to me," she screamed. "You lived there your whole life. You must have known." "I just worked the land, Bethany, like you are now." She paced the small room, her movements jerky. "They're talking about fines, massive fines, and remediation costs. Millions of dollars, Clara. I don't have millions of dollars." "What about the developer?" The luxury condos? She let out a harsh, hysterical laugh. They pulled out the second the news hit the papers. Nobody wants to build on a toxic waste dump. She stopped pacing and stared at me, her chest heaving. The facade of the wealthy heiress was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. "This is why you gave it to me, isn't it?" she whispered, the realization slowly dawning on her face. The horror in her eyes was genuine now. "You set me up. I gave you exactly what you wanted, Bethany," I said softly. "You wanted the legacy. You got it." She lunged at me, grabbing my shoulders. Her fingernails dug into my skin through my thin t-shirt. "You have to help me. We're family. You can't just let me be ruined." "I can't do anything," I said, pulling away from her grip. "It's your land now. Your responsibility. I'll sue you. I'll tell everyone you knew and dumped it on me." "Go ahead," I said. "Prove it. Grandfather is dead. I'm just a grocery store clerk living in a studio apartment. Who are they going to believe? The greedy cousin who snatched the inheritance the moment the old man was in the ground? Or the simple farm girl who walked away with nothing?" She stared at me, her mouth agape. The trap had snapped shut, and she was just now realizing how deep the teeth had sunk. "Get out of my apartment, Bethany," I said. She looked around the small, shabby room, as if seeing it for the first time. Then she looked back at me with pure hatred. "You're a monster," she spat. "No," I said. "I'm just a spectator." She fled the apartment, leaving the door open behind her. I listened to her footsteps thudding down the stairs. I walked over and closed the door gently. I returned to my chair by the window and picked up my coffee cup. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The trap was sprung, but the real predators hadn't even arrived yet. The EPA was a headache. The men from Chicago were a death sentence. I waited. 2 weeks went by. The town buzzed with the scandal of the Beaumont water contamination. People I'd known my whole life, people who had praised grandfather's business acumen, now whispered about his negligence in the aisles of the grocery store. I just kept stocking cans, the cool metal rims biting into my fingertips, listening to the dismantling of my family name with detached interest. Bethany stopped coming into town. The BMW was gone for good, repossessed by the leasing agency, according to Sarah, who heard it from her cousin at the impound lot. Bethany was now driving grandfather's old truck exclusively, its faulty muffler roaring like a wounded beast whenever she ventured out for supplies. Then, the real creditors arrived. It was a Tuesday night, humid and oppressive. I was sitting by my open window, trying to catch a breeze, reading a paperback book whose plot I couldn't remember. Below on Main Street, a car drove slowly past. It was a black sedan, newer than most cars in town, with tinted windows so dark they reflected the streetlights like obsidian mirrors. It didn't belong here. It belonged in the city alleyways grandfather used to frequent in his desperate years. The car paused at the intersection, the low thrum of its powerful engine vibrating through the floorboards of my apartment. It turned left, heading west. Toward the farm, a cold chill snaked up my spine, entirely unrelated to the evening breeze. I knew who they were. I remembered the man with the brass knuckles who had visited grandfather a month before he got sick. The smell of stale cigar smoke and cheap, spicy cologne that lingered in the farmhouse hallway for days after he left. I closed my book. The EPA was paperwork. These men were physics. The next morning, the air in the grocery store felt heavier. Sarah was unusually quiet at her register. When I went to the break room for coffee, the local newspaper was spread out on the table. Vandalism at Beaumont Farm. Equipment barn torched. I poured my coffee. The liquid was black and oily, smelling burnt. I took a sip, letting the bitter taste coat my tongue. It wasn't vandalism. It was a warning. Bethany came in around noon. I was near the front, organizing a display of summer peaches. The sweet, cloying scent of the ripening fruit filled the air, a grotesque reminder of Bethany's favorite perfume, though she wasn't wearing it today. She looked ravaged. She had lost weight. Her linen trousers hung loose on her frame. She wasn't wearing makeup, revealing the blotchy, pale skin beneath, but it was her hands that drew my eye as she reached for a loaf of cheap white bread. Her left wrist was wrapped in an ace bandage. The fabric was stark white against her skin, wrapped tightly. The sight of it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. A sudden, phantom pressure crushed my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I tasted gasoline in the back of my throat. The memory of the steering column pinning me down, the metallic snap of my own bones. I gripped the edge of the peach display, my knuckles turning white, fighting the sudden wave of nausea. The past life was bleeding into the present. Bethany looked up and saw me staring at her wrist. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, wincing as the fabric brushed the bandage. Her eyes were feral, darting around the store to see if anyone else had noticed. An accident, she mumbled, her voice hoarse, lacking all its former haughty inflection. I tripped in the barn. Before the fire. You should be more careful, I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, flat and devoid of emotion. She stared at me, her lip trembling. For a moment, I thought she was going to beg again, to ask for money I didn't have, for help I wouldn't give. They said. She stopped, swallowing hard. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a terrified whisper. The smell of stale sweat and fear coming off her was pungent, overpowering the peaches. Clara, there are men. They say grandfather owed them money. A lot of money. They said the barn was just the first payment. I selected a peach, feeling the soft fuzz against my thumb. Grandfather had many debts, Bethany. You said you could manage them. Not these debts? These aren't banks. They're animals. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over onto her pale cheeks. They want $50,000 by Friday, or they're coming back. I don't have $50, Clara. I placed the peach carefully back onto the pile. It rolled slightly, coming to rest against another. Then I suppose you should sell something else, I said calmly. The color drained completely from her face. Sell what? The land is toxic. The equipment is burnt. Nobody wants it. You wanted it? I reminded her softly. The despair on her face hardened into something brittle. You hate me that much? I don't hate you, Bethany. I told you. I just don't care. I walked away from her, heading towards the stockroom. I didn't look back. I heard her shuffling to the register, the sound of her defeated footsteps muffled by the linoleum. Friday came. The air in town was thick with anticipation, though no one knew exactly why. It was the kind of small-town instinct that sensed a coming storm. I was in my apartment that evening, the window open. The crickets were loud. At 10:45 p.m., the sound of a distant explosion rattled my window pane. It wasn't thunder. It was sharper, deeper. I stood up and walked to the window. In the west, towards the farm, an orange glow lit up the horizon, staining the bottom of the clouds the color of dried blood. The sirens started minutes later. A wailing chorus cutting through the humid night. Fire trucks from 3 neighboring towns tore down Main Street, their red lights flashing against the brick buildings, painting the town in strokes of violence. I watched them go. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt a profound sense of completion. The trap had not only sprung, it had shattered the prey. I drove out to the farm the next morning. It was Saturday. I didn't have to work. The sheriff's deputy at the end of the long driveway tried to stop me, but when he recognized me, he just shook his head and waved me through. It's bad, Clara, he said, spitting tobacco juice onto the gravel. Real bad. The smell hit me a quarter mile out. The acrid, choking stench of burnt wood, melted rubber, and something sweeter, like singed hair. The smoke still hung low over the fields, a gray shroud covering the dying corn. I parked my truck near what used to be the equipment shed. It was a black smudge on the landscape now, a tangle of scorched metal beams protruding from a heap of ash like blackened ribs. But the main attraction was the house. It wasn't gone, but it was ruined. The fire in the barn had spread to the attached garage and caught the west wing of the house. The beautiful white clapboard siding was scorched black. Windows were blown out, jagged teeth of glass framing dark, empty holes. The roof over the kitchen had collapsed inward. It looked like a corpse that had been left out in the sun too long. I found Bethany sitting on the front porch steps, the only part of the structure that seemed relatively untouched. She was wrapped in a coarse gray blanket provided by the Red Cross. She looked up as I approached. If I hadn't known it was her, I wouldn't have recognized the woman sitting there. Her blonde hair was matted with soot and dirt, hanging limply around her face. Her expensive linen clothes were gone, replaced by oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt someone must have given her. Her face was streaked with ash and dried tears. But it was her eyes that were truly terrifying. They were completely vacant. The eyes of someone who had seen the bottom of the abyss. She didn't speak as I stopped in front of her. The gravel crunched beneath my cheap sneakers. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence left by the fire. "They came back," she whispered finally. Her voice was cracked, like dry leaves rubbing together. "I see that," I said. She looked at the ruin of the house, then back at me. A slow, dawning realization began to creep into her vacant eyes, a spark of life returning. But it was the hateful spark of a cornered rat. "The insurance won't pay," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "Because of the debts, because of who started the fire. They called it criminal activity related to the property owner." She began to laugh. It was a low, bubbling sound that turned into a racking cough. "I own nothing. Less than nothing. I have millions in EPA fines and $3 million in debt to people who burn down houses with people inside them." She looked up at me, and the hatred in her eyes was pure and unadulterated. "You knew about the loan sharks too," she stated. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer immediately. I looked around at the farm, my childhood home, the place where I had sweated and bled and eventually died in another life. It was finally, truly gone. "Grandfather kept detailed ledgers," I said softly, "under the floorboards in the tack room. The one that just burned down." Her jaw dropped. A strangled sound escaped her throat. You! Let me take this? You let me sign my life away to monsters? You didn't ask what you were signing, Bethany. You just asked for the pen." She stood up, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand. "Why?" she screamed, the sound raw and tearing at her throat. "Why would you do this? I'm your cousin. Your blood." The smell of the burnt ruin filled my nose, choking out any lingering scent of her vanilla perfume. "Blood didn't stop you from cutting my brake line," I said. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than the smoke. Bethany froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes widened until I thought they might split. The color drained from her face so completely, she looked like a wax figure. "What?" she whispered, barely audible. "The tractor," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. 3 months from now, in the North Pasture. You were tired of waiting for grandfather to die. You needed me out of the way so you could sell to the developers before the market turned." She stumbled back a step, gripping the porch railing for support. The rotted wood creaked under her weight. "You're crazy," she stammered, but her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone looking at a ghost. "I tasted the gasoline, Bethany," I said, taking a step closer to her. "I felt the steering column crush my chest. I smelled your perfume as you watched me die, and then drove away in your BMW." She was shaking her head frantically now, denial warring with impossible terror. No, that's not possible. You're alive. You're right here. I am now, I said. And so are you, with everything you ever wanted. I gestured wide to the blackened ruin, the toxic fields, the smoking remains of the legacy she had coveted. It's all yours, cousin. Every toxic, indebted, burnt acre of it. She looked around wildly at the destruction, as if seeing it truly for the first time. The weight of it, the inescapable reality of her situation, seemed to crush her physically. She sank back down onto the steps, pulling her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth. "Help me," she sobbed into her knees. A broken, pathetic sound. "Please, Clara. I don't know what to do. They'll kill me." I looked down at her. In my past life, this sight would have broken my heart. I would have done anything to fix it, to save family. Now, I felt only the cool morning breeze on my skin. I smelled the ash. I heard the caw of a crow circling overhead, looking for carrion. "I can't help you, Bethany," I said. "I'm just a grocery store clerk. I have to get to work." I turned around and walked away. I didn't speed up. I walked steadily back to my truck, my shoes crunching on the gravel driveway that I would never drive down again. Behind me, Bethany's sobs grew louder, a desperate wail rising into the smoky air. I didn't look back. I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove away from the Beaumont farm forever. 2 years passed. Time didn't heal things in this town. It just buried them under layers of new gossip and sediment. The Beaumont farm became a cautionary tale, a literal scar on the landscape. The EPA fenced off the entire 500 acres with chain link and barbed wire, slapping bright yellow Hazard Keep Out signs every 50 feet. It sat there, a massive, festering wound of weeds and rusted metal, visible from the highway. Nobody bought it. The county seized it for unpaid taxes eventually, but even they didn't know what to do with it. It just sat there, rotting. I heard Bethany left town about a week after the fire. Sarah told me she hitched a ride with a long-haul trucker heading west. Nobody knew where she ended up. Some said she was working in a diner in Nevada. Others whispered she'd fallen in with a bad crowd in LA, trying to hide from the Chicago creditors. I didn't look for her. I didn't care. My life continued to be small, quiet, and wonderfully boring. I was promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store. I got a 50-cent raise and a name tag that said Clara asked MGR. It felt like a bigger achievement than owning 500 acres of toxic dirt ever had. I moved out of the studio above the bakery and rented a small, 2-bedroom house on the edge of town. It had a postage stamp-sized backyard where the soil was clean. On a Sunday morning in late spring, I was in that backyard, kneeling in the dirt. The sun was warm on my back, not searing like it used to be in the vast cornfields. The air smelled of damp earth and growing things, clean and sweet. I was planting tomatoes. I dug a small hole with a hand trowel, the cool soil crumbling between my fingers that were no longer calloused from wrestling heavy machinery. I placed a small tomato seedling into the earth, packing the dirt gently around its fragile stem. It was honest work. If these tomatoes died, it would be because I didn't water them, not because of industrial runoff hidden decades ago. If they thrived, I would eat them out of a bowl with a little salt in the quiet of my clean kitchen. A robin landed on the fence post, watching me with bright, beaded eyes. It chirped once, a sharp, clear sound that cut through the quiet morning hum of the town. I sat back on my heels, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my dirty glove. I looked at the row of small green plants, bright with promise against the dark earth. I thought about the girl who died under a tractor, desperate to save a legacy that was already poisoned. I felt a distant pity for her, like looking at an old photograph of a stranger. I wasn't her anymore. I had shed that skin, left it to burn in the wreckage of the Beaumont farm along with Bethany's vanity and grandfather's sins. I wasn't rich. I wasn't a landowner. I had no grand legacy to leave behind. I picked up the watering can and began to water the seedlings. The water made a gentle splashing sound as it hit the soil. I was alive. The soil under my fingernails was clean. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was free.